973ESPN.com. Eagles and NFL Insider John McMullen. Read his column at 973ESPN.com. Read his Eagles coverage there. And the court denies the motion. Elliott's suspension is back on. John, have we heard the end of this for 2017?
I don't think so. I think we got a couple more hurdles. I think we've heard the end of it for this week. I'm not even feeling comfortable with that. So I think ultimately, as you said, he will not play this weekend, and then we'll see from there. But if you read the ruling, it's pretty clear. It's what we've been talking about the entire way, and it's very, very rare. The court cited that courts overturn essentially employment punishment. I think a lot of people get confused and sort of mix this up with legal ramifications and the fact that obviously Ezekiel was not prosecuted from a police standpoint. It's not about that. It's about the NFL's right to hand out punishment under the CBA, and it's pretty clear they have that right. So that's ultimately why they keep winning these cases. And, you know, along the way, there are often judges that kind of, what they're trying to do is tweak the NFL and say, come on, guys, be a little bit more fair, be a little bit more balanced before they get to that end game. But we're getting to that end game. We got a step closer, and we'll see. I've always thought at some point, similar to Tom Brady, when it was laid out in front of him, by the former Solicitor General of this country, said, hey, look, we can keep fighting, but we're going to lose. And if Ezekiel Elliott's attorneys are ever honest with them, maybe he gets to that point.
So the ruling means Elliott's 6-game suspension is back on. He will not play Sunday against the Falcons. Now, this just came out recently, so there's not a whole heck of a lot of news that we can really follow up on, but I guess on the football standpoint here, what does this mean for Dallas without Elliott if they have to play 6 weeks without him?
Well, it's a significant, obviously, blow to their chances. This is one of their best players, one of the best running backs in football. They are pretty deep at that position. They have Alfred Morris, Darren McFadden, so I think they're better equipped than most teams to handle a punch like this. And we've seen, hey, whether it's due to injury, suspension elsewhere, NFL teams are used to losing players, and the Cowboys are going to have to get through this. It definitely makes it much more difficult for them to challenge the Eagles in the NFC East or make a run at the wild card. But, hey, I thought with Ezekiel Elliott, they weren't going to win the NFC East. The Eagles are a better football team.
Many people believe the same, but wild card, I mean, they're in that wild card mix, and a lot of people think that they've been playing a lot better. The line has played better. The quarterback has played very well with that running game. You take him out, and all of a sudden, I mean, do they go from a wild card contender, an NFC East contender, to maybe not a playoff team?
It's possible. I mean, that could be the ultimate real punishment here, is the fact it could take him from being a wild card team to out of the postseason. But, hey, I still think they have the talent to emerge and be at least push for one of those spots. Because I think if you look at the rest of the teams in the NFC, you can poke holes in all of them, every single one of them. The Rams, you know, they have the great point differential, but obviously that's a very unproven lot. They've never been here in a long time. You have a second-year quarterback who looked awful last year. You have the quarterback issues in Minnesota that we've talked about a lot. You know, the Saints are on a run, but we know how bad their defense has been over the years. It's been a little bit better, but it's not exactly great. So, and you've seen Seattle, the one sort of old standby. We're always used to making those late season runs. They just don't look very good right now. So I don't think you look at that landscape and say, even without Ezekiel Elliott, the Cowboys can't make the playoffs, because I think they can, but it's going to be much more difficult for them.
Yeah, we know that the Eagles and Cowboys play next week. That's who the Eagles come out of that bye with, and that really changes the dynamics of that game if he's not there. Do you think, though, there's a possibility that this could be a 1-week suspension now and that it would be 5 games that he'd have to serve later on? Could that be a possibility?
Yeah, it could be. I think it's less and less likely. I think this was a big blow, this one. But they do still have a couple other hurdles the NFL has to get through. And if they continue to fight, they still have remedies. And you never know. It's tough to predict. If you look at Judge Doty, for instance, has always been David Doty's always the guy who's always trying to send a message to the NFL, and he's done it so many times over the years in federal court. So you never know about the personal leanings of a particular judge or a group of judges. Today was a 3-judge panel. So you can never say never. The only thing I've said since day one is he's ultimately going to serve the suspension. I've always been confident in that, and I remain confident in that.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, also covers the league nationally. Read his national column at 97.3 ESPN.com. Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen.
Yeah, John, I want to ask you a little bit about the Rams because they put up 51 points against the Giants. They put up 33 and shut out the Cardinals, and then they beat a pretty decent Jaguars team. That's their last 3 W's in a row. But Gil's been on this Rams team for a long time when we do who's in and who's out. I'm warming to the Rams. I'm not all the way there yet. I guess I'm looking for your interpretation of this team and why you think they're so much better this season than they were last season. Can changing the coach make that much of a difference?
Yeah, I think it can when your coach is an offensive-minded guy and he understands that position, and you just drafted a guy number 1 overall in the draft at the quarterback position. I thought if you looked at how the Rams set it up, it was like the polar opposite of what the Eagles did with Carson Wentz. They had Jeff Fisher, who was a defensive-minded guy. They had Rob Boris, who was an offensive line coach before he became a coordinator. So, and you look at here with Peterson and Reich and DeFilippo, we've talked about it a lot. They've all played the quarterback position. They sort of set up this ecosystem for Carson Wentz to succeed. They did the exact opposite in the Rams, and you saw it with the Rams, and you saw how it worked out. So to their credit, they changed and they went in a different direction. They brought in people who understand the position, and they've started the reclamation project on Jared Goff's career. He's looked great. He's not Carson Wentz level good, but now he looks like he's going to be a long-term answer as a starting quarterback, and they've always been pretty good defensively. And I would argue that Aaron Donald is probably now that J.J. Watt is no longer J.J. Watt, he's gone. He's probably the preeminent game wrecker in this game from a defensive side. So he can beat you by himself. So they're a sneaky good team.
Yeah, it's interesting, though, because their success of late, most of it's come on the road. In fact, I read a story about how when they were playing Seattle, and that was a home game for them, the people were yelling so loud for the Seahawks that they drowned it out for Jared Goff. He had trouble communicating the snap count, so it's not like they really have a home field advantage. They will be home this week taking on the Houston Texans, but as people try to jump on this Rams bandwagon and say that they're an improved team, it doesn't look like they have much home support. Is that something the NFL gets concerned about?
No, because I think the Rams are the one team. I mean, that's the kind of market Los Angeles is. They're not going to support you unless you're successful, and there's not too many people who thought the Rams were going to be successful coming into this season. And there was no reason to think it, to be honest, because Goff looked terrible. And they hired the youngest coach in NFL history. So there wasn't much confidence going into this season. But, they have the history in that city. They will be popular in that city if they are successful, and they're getting to the point. And it is going to be a bandwagon type situation, as you mentioned, Pete. But people are going to jump on that bandwagon, and they will have a home field advantage now that they're a good football team.
Which playoff picture looks more clear, the NFC playoff picture or the AFC picture?
Well, I think the top of the AFC is clear. You have New England, you have Pittsburgh, you have Kansas City, and those are probably the three top teams you're going to have to deal with. Whereas I just mentioned with the NFC, you got a lot of question marks behind the Eagles. I could see every single one of those teams I just mentioned, even the Rams, because they don't have a history, and we don't know how Goff is going to hold up in November and December. I could see any of those teams at 6-2 not making the playoffs, kind of falling apart. I think all of them have that potential. So I still think the NFC side is pretty wide open.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com at JF McMullen. The NFL saying that Roger Goodell's extension could be finalized soon. We talked yesterday a little bit about the kind of shots fired from Jerry Jones, but do you anticipate this kind of going smoothly?
Well, no, because Jerry's stomping his feet. I mean, they voted to extend this contract months and months ago, 32-0. And as I said a little bit yesterday on the show, the hypocrisy of Jerry Jones knows no bounds. I mean, he's upset because of what's going on with Ezekiel Elliott. And he also kind of folded in the national anthem controversy. And if you guys remember the Papa John's conference call that got so much play in the national news, where Papa John himself said the NFL was to blame for his bad sales, a lot of people think that was at the behest of Jerry Jones, who owns about 100 different Papa John franchises. He's upset, and he's hired David Boies, who's a very high-profile attorney involved in the Harvey Weinstein case, involved in sort of both sides of that sticky wicket with the New York Times. And so he's a high-powered guy, and I don't think Jerry's going to go quietly into the night.
Yeah, we know that Roger Goodell is a very polarizing figure in this league that the players don't like. I mean, he's not very popular amongst the players, but he makes the owners a lot of money, and now you got one owner who's very powerful. Do you think that Jerry Jones is kind of taking this stance based on the Ezekiel Elliott, the way that's handled, the way he's handled the anthem stuff? Because where did this take a turn that Jones, a guy who's about money, making a lot of money, guys making him a lot of money, where did this start that Jones began to turn his back on the commissioner?
Oh, it's no question. It's the Elliott suspension. He felt that Roger Goodell wronged him. And as you mentioned, it's interesting because Jerry Jones and I have the same thought that Roger Goodell should no longer be the NFL commissioner, but we get there in far different ways. I've said it since really the Ray Rice issue. He lacks credibility, and he can't go forward with the face of an organization that lacks credibility. But in Jones' case, he was fine with it. He was fine with the mistakes in Ray Rice, Greg Hardy, Adrian Peterson, Deflategate, any scandal he was fine with until he suspended Ezekiel Elliott. And then it became personal, and that's where the hypocrisy comes in. And then he sort of folded in the national anthem because he was one of the owners that thought the commissioner, and by the way, I agree with this, the commissioner should have been proactive and immediately said, look, you have to stand, we'll work with you, but this is a brand, and this is what's best for our business. I always say Roger's very reactive, he's not proactive, but that's sort of like an add-on to make Jerry not look so blatantly hypocritical, but it's all about Ezekiel Elliott.
Okay, a couple Giants came out saying McAdoo has lost support of the team anonymously. They say
they
this.
think it's defensive players that are saying that too, by the way.
Well, whoever it may be, it's messy in New York, John.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff coming out of there, he's a hall monitor. He's suspending, the DRC and Janoris Jenkins. It's a mess. It really is. And You know, the Giants aren't one of those organizations known for making quick trigger decisions in going from coach to coach. So I think a lot of people say they're going to stick with it and try to overcome this. But at some point it gets to a situation where you can't spin in a positive fashion. So, I mean, somebody's going in New York, and it could be McAdoo, it could be Jerry Reese, the GM, or it could be both. But somebody's got to pay for what's going on there. And, I'm going to toot my own horn there because I saw that one coming. I didn't think they'd be this bad, but I thought they were going to be a bad football team.
And I had them winning the division. So, I mean, I really thought that that team made a couple of – now, again, the big move that they didn't do was address the – it's so fickle in this league, though, John. Reese, the GM, last year he was great. He picked the right guys on defense,
defensive guys,
and they hit. This year he's an idiot because he didn't address an area that he didn't address last year. They didn't address the offensive line last year. So, you know, one year he didn't do the thing, but he was smart. The next year he didn't do the thing again, and people will say, well, he's an idiot because, you know, they didn't address an area that needed to be addressed last year. And a lot of this goes into, you hate to say it, but from year to year the schedule changes. Their schedule last year was not very challenging, and they prospered from it. This year the schedule's been challenging in the NFC East, and their offensive line has been an issue.
Yeah, but Jerry Reese has been around this league long enough to understand. Last year,
by the way, John, real quick, John. I don't want to interrupt, but breaking news with the Eagles. They have just signed Tim Jernigan to a 4-year, $48 million extension, which is newsworthy because there were some questions whether or not they could get him signed in the cap situation. So I know it's right. It just happened. Schefter just tweeted it out, but that's a pretty shrewd move again for Roseman.
Yeah, Howie's. You know, we've talked about Howie in contracts a lot, and he always tends to be proactive with players he wants, and you know that kind of told you about Jordan Matthews. We talked about it. If Howie wants a guy, he's going to be proactive, and clearly Tim Jernigan has been a great fit. And if he gets to free agency, he would have made more than that. So that's a typical Howie Roseman move, and it's not a surprise at all. But you mentioned, as I said, with Jerry Reese, he as I said, he knows. He's been around this league a long time. He knows last year was an anomaly. I kept saying on the show, I don't know how the Giants win football games. And it was just this very small margin of error because the football was bouncing their way. They were great defensively, but they couldn't do anything offensively. Jerry knew that, and he decided not to address the offensive line at all, as you mentioned. He was hoping there would be improvement in-house from Eric Flowers and Bobby Hart. It was a bad decision.
All right, John, I know you'll be doing some digging on this Jernigan stuff. 4 years, $48 million for Tim Jernigan. He'll be back with the Eagles, and we appreciate John. Of course, follow him at JF McMullen here on the Sports Bash. John, thanks, man.
Hey, thank you, guys.